The passenger in the glass. The Appalachian mist curled around my tires like grasping fingers. It was 2 a.m., and the winding asphalt of the mountain pass felt less like a road and more like a throat swallowing me whole. I was alone, or so I prayed to keep my heart from hammering through my ribs. Suddenly, the comforting blue line of my GPS vanished, replaced by dead static, despite my phone showing full bars. The silence in the cabin grew heavy, pressurized, like the air before a violent storm. Then, I glanced at the rearview mirror, and my blood froze into slush. For a split second, illuminated by the bloody glow of my taillights, a silhouette sat rigid in the back seat. I wasn't driving alone anymore.
The Chapter 1, The Dead Zone. The darkness on Old Route 17 wasn't just an absence of light, it was a physical weight. The high beams of my sedan cut 2 narrow tunnels through the gloom, illuminating nothing but the gnarled bark of ancient pines and the cracked gray asphalt that wound up the mountain like a scar. It was 2:14 a.m. The world had reduced itself to the hum of the engine, the rhythmic thump-thump of tires over expansion joints, and the claustrophobic interior of my car. I had taken the shortcut to shave 40 minutes off the trip to Asheville, a decision that now felt increasingly foolish. The isolation here was absolute. There were no streetlights, no reflective markers, and for the last hour, not a single pair of headlights had drifted past me in the opposite direction. I was a solitary capsule moving through a void. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as the road banked sharply to the left. The silence inside the cabin was thick, broken only by the low murmur of a podcast I wasn't really listening to, some dry discussion about history that served only as white noise to keep the drowsiness at bay. Then, the digital comfort of the modern world began to rot. It started with the audio. The podcast stuttered, the voices stretching into a slow digital slur before cutting out entirely. I frowned, reaching over to tap the screen mounted on the dashboard. The map, usually a reassuring grid of blue lines and ETA markers, froze. The arrow representing my car stopped moving, even as I continued to climb the winding pass. "Come on," I muttered, the sound of my own voice startlingly loud in the sudden quiet. I glanced at the top corner of the screen. 5 bars, LTE. The signal was perfect. I tapped the screen again, harder this time. Nothing. Then, with a digital pop that sounded like a breaking bone, the map vanished. The screen flooded with gray static. Not the snowy static of an old television, but a flat, dead gray slate. The text "No GPS signal" flashed in stark white letters, pulsing with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine, distinct from the fatigue I'd been fighting. It was primal, the lizard brain waking up to tell me that something in the environment had shifted. I looked at my phone sitting in the cup holder, full bars there too, yet the navigation was dead. The digital tether that connected me to civilization had been severed, leaving me drifting in the Appalachian dark. I shook it off. Just a glitch.
I told myself, keep driving. The road only goes one way. But the atmosphere in the car had changed. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the pressure had dropped. I reached out to adjust the climate control, cranking the heat up a notch, but the chill didn't dissipate. It wasn't the air, it was the space itself. The cabin felt smaller, crowded. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. It was an automatic, habitual check, a glance to see if anyone was tailgating me, though I knew the road was empty. My breath hitched in my throat. For a fraction of a second, the red glow of my taillights washed over the back seat, illuminating the interior in a bloody crimson haze. I wasn't alone. There was a silhouette in the back seat, directly behind the passenger side. It was rigid, upright, and terrifyingly still. I saw the curve of a shoulder, the dark mass of a torso, and the distinct outline of a head staring straight forward. Adrenaline dumped into my system like ice water. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest as the car fishtailed slightly on the damp asphalt. The seatbelt locked against my chest, knocking the wind out of me as the car shuddered to a halt in the middle of the road. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking, twisting around in the driver's seat to face the intruder. I was ready to fight, ready to beg, ready to bolt. The back seat was empty. My chest heaved, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stared at the upholstery, the empty buckles, the floor mats. Nothing. No intruder. No hitchhiker I'd somehow missed. Just the empty, beige fabric of my Honda. I let out a shaky, hysterical laugh, running a hand through my hair. "Jesus, you're losing it, Mike. You're tired. It's just shadows." I turned back around, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. I needed to get moving. Sitting idle in the middle of a mountain road was suicide, ghosts or not. I shifted the car back into drive, my foot hovering over the gas pedal. But before I could press down, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror again. I froze. I didn't want to look. Every instinct I had screamed at me to keep my eyes on the road, to floor it, and never look back. But the pull was irresistible, a magnetic force dragging my gaze upward. I looked at the rear window. The glass was fogging up, condensation building rapidly despite the dry mountain air. But it wasn't uniform. In the center of the rear windshield,
Directly where the head of the silhouette had been, the fog was disturbed. I watched, paralyzed, as the condensation shifted. It wasn't fading, it was being pressed away. Slowly, deliberately, a shape formed on the glass. It started with a palm, then a thumb, then 4 long, slender fingers. A handprint. It was perfectly defined, the ridges of the fingerprints visible in the moisture. My brain tried to rationalize it. You touched the glass earlier. It's just an old smudge showing up in the fog. But logic died a violent death a second later. The handprint wasn't static. The fingers were sliding downward, leaving long, trailing streaks through the condensation, as if the hand were dragging itself down the glass in despair. And the terrifying, undeniable detail that made my bladder go weak, based on the angle of the thumb and the curvature of the palm, the handprint wasn't on the outside of the car, it was on the inside. Someone, something, invisible, was pressing against the rear glass, inches from the back of my head. I gasped, the sound strangled in my throat, and stomped on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, engine roaring, desperate to put distance between me and the empty mountain air. But as the speedometer climbed, I couldn't shake the sensation that the passenger wasn't gone. The heaviness in the back seat remained, a silent, unseen weight pressing down on the suspension, riding with me into the deepest part of the night.
Chapter 2: The Static Whisper. The speedometer needle trembled past 60, far too fast for the serpentine twists of the mountain pass. My knuckles were white, fused to the steering wheel, as if letting go would cause the car to disintegrate into the black void surrounding me. I didn't dare look at the rearview mirror again. The image of that handprint, the trailing, greasy smear on the inside of the glass, was branded onto my retinas. "Just drive," I chanted internally, the mantra of a man losing his grip on reality. Just get to the bottom of the mountain, get to lights, get to people. The cabin was suffocating. The heat I had cranked up earlier now felt oppressive, a dry, stifling blanket that smelled faintly of ozone and old dust. I reached out to lower the window, desperate for a blast of cold mountain air to shock my system back to sanity, but my finger hovered over the switch. If I rolled the window down, the glass would slide into the door panel. The barrier between me and the darkness would disappear. And if there was something inside the car, would fresh air let it out, or would it let something else in?
I withdrew my hand, shivering despite the sweat trickling down my temples. Then the silence broke. It wasn't the engine or the wind. It was a sharp electronic crackle, violent enough to make me flinch. The infotainment screen, which had been a dead gray slate since the GPS failed, suddenly flared with a blinding white light. I squinted, momentarily blinded, swerving slightly across the double yellow lines. What the hell? The speakers, previously mute, erupted with a wall of static. It wasn't the soft, snowy hiss of an untuned frequency. It was a harsh, grinding roar, like heavy stones being dragged over concrete. It filled the small space of the sedan, vibrating in the door panels and rattling my teeth. "Stop!" I yelled at the dashboard, stabbing the power button repeatedly. "Shut up!" The button did nothing. I twisted the volume knob violently to the left, trying to kill the sound. The digital volume bar on the screen didn't move. It remained maxed out, a bright red line warning of auditory damage. The static surged, oscillating in pitch, sounding less like random interference and more like a voice screaming underwater. I was doing 65 now, my focus split between the treacherous road and the possessed electronics screaming at me. Panic was transforming into a jagged, frantic terror.
I considered smashing the screen with my fist, anything to stop the noise. Then, abruptly, the static cut out. The silence that followed was worse. It was sudden and absolute, ringing in my ears. The screen dimmed from blinding white to a deep, bruised purple. And then the whispering began. It started from the rear speakers, the ones directly behind my head. Don't. The voice was genderless, dry and raspy, like sandpaper sliding over wood. It didn't sound like it was coming from the speaker. It sounded like someone was leaning forward from the back seat, their lips brushing the mesh of the speaker grill. Stop. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my sternum. I checked the mirror involuntarily. Nothing but darkness and the faint, lingering smear of the handprint. Don't. Stop. The car. The command was clear. It wasn't a request. It was a desperate, terrified imperative.
Don't stop. They are waiting. Don't stop. Who is waiting? I sobbed, tears blurring my vision. What do you want? The screen flickered. The purple hue deepened to black. Text began to scroll across the display, replacing the radio frequency. It wasn't track information. Run, run, run. The dread was a physical weight now, heavy in my gut. I was trapped in a metal box hurtling through the dark, hostage to a voice that demanded speed on a road designed to kill speeders. The entity in the car, the thing that had left the handprint, wasn't just a passenger anymore. It was the co-pilot. I checked the fuel gauge, half a tank, enough to get to Asheville, enough to get away. I just had to keep moving. I just had to obey the voice. Don't stop the car, the radio hissed, the voice sounding wet now, like a throat full of blood. He is close. Who? I whispered. The one in the mirror. A chill, colder than the mountain air, washed over me. I locked my eyes forward, refusing to look at the glass. I gripped the wheel until my fingers cramped. And then, the car betrayed me. It happened without a mechanical shutter or a warning light. There was no sputter of the fuel injection, no grinding of the transmission. 1 second, I was doing 50 miles per hour, the headlights cutting a bright swath through the trees. The next second, the engine died. The tachometer needle dropped to 0 like a stone. The power steering vanished, the wheel instantly becoming a rigid, heavy stone in my hands. The power brakes stiffened. But the worst part was the light. The dashboard went black. The radio cut out mid-whisper, plunging the cabin into silence. And ahead of me, the twin beams of the headlights flickered once, twice, like a dying heartbeat, and then extinguished. I was moving at 50 miles an hour in total absolute darkness. Blind panic seized me. I slammed on the brakes with both feet, praying I wouldn't skid into a tree or off a cliff. The tires roared against the pavement, the only sound in the dead world. The car slew sideways, the momentum carrying me forward into the black void. I came to a halt with a violent jerk that threw me against the locked seatbelt. Silence returned. Heavy, thick, suffocating. I sat there, breathing in ragged gasps, my hands shaking so hard I couldn't unclench them from the wheel. Outside, the darkness was impenetrable. Inside, the silence was waiting. The radio was dead. The engine was dead.
And I had stopped the car.
Chapter 3: The Cold Shoulder. The silence that followed the death of the engine was not empty. It was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. The car, moments ago a vibrating, heated sanctuary, had instantly transformed into a tomb. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling metal, a rhythmic, dying clack, clack, clack that sounded disturbingly like fingernails tapping against the chassis. I sat frozen, my hands still gripping the dead steering wheel. The darkness was absolute. The headlights hadn't just faded, they had been snuffed out, leaving me blind in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness. The blackness outside the windows was so thick, it felt like the car had been buried underground. "Okay," I whispered. My voice was thin, pathetic in the suffocating quiet. "Okay, just start it." I twisted the key in the ignition. Nothing. Not a sputter, not a click, not even the whine of the starter motor. The car was electrically dead. The battery, the alternator, the spark, gone. I turned the key back and forth, panic rising in my throat like bile. "Don't stop the car." The radio's whisper echoed in my memory, mocking me. I hadn't wanted to stop. The car had stopped me. I fumbled for my phone in the cup holder, desperate for a torch, for a signal, for anything. I pressed the side button. The screen remained black. I pressed it again, harder, my thumb digging into the glass. Dead. It had been at 90% battery 10 minutes ago. A cold drop of sweat slid down my temple. The air in the cabin was dropping rapidly, the residual heat of the vents sucked away by a supernatural chill. I could see my own breath now, faint plumes of gray in the darkness, illuminated only by the after images burning in my retinas. I wasn't alone. I knew it with the certainty of a prey animal sensing a predator. The presence in the backseat was no longer a silhouette in a mirror or a glitch in the corner of my eye. It was physical. It was there. I could feel the displacement of the air behind me. I could smell it, a faint copper scent, like old pennies and wet earth. I had to get out. The realization hit me with violent clarity. The car was a cage. If I stayed in here, in the dark, with that thing, I would never leave this mountain. I needed to run. I needed to take my chances on the road, in the open air. I shifted my weight slowly, trying not to make a sound, though the leather seat groaned beneath me. I moved my left hand from the wheel.
Groping blindly for the door latch, my fingers brushed the cold plastic of the armrest. I found the recess of the handle. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would bruise my ribs. 1, 2, 3, pull, and run. I reached for the chrome lever. But just as my fingertips grazed the cold metal, the sound of movement erupted from the back seat. It wasn't the rustle of fabric. It was the wet, slick sound of something peeling itself off the upholstery. I gasped, my hand freezing inches from the latch. Then, the impossible happened. Before I could curl my fingers around the handle to pull it open, the lever moved on its own. It was a sharp, mechanical jerk. The interior handle snapped inward, pulled by the tension of the internal cables, as if someone had yanked the corresponding mechanism deep inside the door panel. Simultaneously, the lock plunger, the vertical rod at the top of the door card, slid down with a definitive, echoing thunk. I hadn't touched it. "No," I whimpered, snatching my hand back as if the door had burned me. The sound of the lock engaging hadn't come from my door alone. It was a synchronized mechanical wave. Clack, clack, clack. All 4 doors locked in unison. The command hadn't come from the driver's seat. It had been triggered from the rear. I stared into the darkness of the door panel, my breath hitching in ragged gasps. The car wasn't just dead, it was sealed. The child locks, the central locking, something in the back seat had manipulated the linkage. It wanted me inside. "Let me out," I screamed, the sudden noise tearing my throat. I grabbed the handle and yanked it violently. It was jammed. The mechanism was rigid, held fast by a force that felt far stronger than a simple mechanical lock. I threw my shoulder against the door, but it was like hitting a solid wall of rock. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the steering wheel, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and the back seat. The air in the car was now freezing, biting at my exposed skin. And then I felt it, a soft, distinct pressure on the back of my seat. Something was leaning forward. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, electrified by pure, primal terror. I didn't want to look. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for the nightmare to end, for the sun to rise, for the engine to roar back to life. But the pull was there again, the urge to look, the mirror. I opened my eyes, despite the total darkness outside.
The rear-view mirror held a faint, impossible luminescence, a gray, sickly glow that seemed to emanate from the glass itself. And in that glow, I saw it. A face. It was hovering directly over my right shoulder, in the gap between the 2 front seats. It was impossibly pale, the skin the color of bone, stretched tight over a skull that seemed too large for a human head. There were no eyes, just deep, hollow sockets that seemed to absorb the faint light. Its mouth was a thin, lipless slit. It wasn't looking at the road. It was looking at me. I screamed, a raw sound of terror that filled the small cabin, and squeezed my eyes shut again, flinching away from the image. When I opened them a split second later, the face was gone. The space between the seats was empty. The mirror reflected only the dark interior of the car. But the cold remained. And then from the dashboard, a single green light flickered to life. The GPS screen hummed, casting a dim, eerie glow over the cabin. The engine roared. Without me touching the key, the car shuddered violently, the RPM spiking as the engine screamed back to life. The headlights flashed on, blindingly bright, cutting through the darkness like twin blades. I sat paralyzed, my hands hovering over the wheel. The car was idling, vibrating with an aggressive, hungry energy. The GPS map, which had been dead static, now displayed a clear, crisp route. The destination was flagged with a red pin, a location only 2 miles away. Old Oak Cemetery. I had never entered that destination. I didn't even know there was a cemetery on this mountain. The radio crackled one last time, the static clearing to reveal that same dry, whispering voice. Drive.
Chapter 4: The Gravel Throat. The engine didn't just idle, it growled. It was a low, guttural vibration that shook the dashboard and rattled my teeth. a sound far too aggressive for a 4-cylinder sedan. It sounded like a beast waking up from a long, angry slumber. My hands were fused to the steering wheel, knuckles white, trembling so violently that the leather wrap squeaked against my palms. I stared at the GPS screen. The blue light was the only thing piercing the gloom of the cabin, casting corpse-like shadows across the passenger seat. Old Oak Cemetery, 1.8 miles. Estimated arrival, 2:33 a.m. I hadn't touched the screen. I hadn't spoken a word. The destination had been pulled from the ether, or perhaps pulled from the cold, dead mind of the thing sitting behind me. Drive, the radio had whispered. I didn't want to. Every neuron in my brain was firing in a panic loop, screaming at me to smash the window, to tuck and roll, to run into the woods and take my chances with the bears and the cold. But my body wouldn't obey. A supernatural lethargy weighed down my limbs, a heavy, hypnotic compulsion that tethered me to the driver's seat. The car felt less like a vehicle and more like a stomach I was already being digested inside. And the doors were still locked. I could feel the mechanism holding tight, a rigid mechanical fist keeping me inside. I shifted the car into drive. My foot eased off the brake. The sedan lurched forward, eager, hungry. We moved through the darkness, the headlights cutting a sharp, trembling cone through the mist. The main road was bad, but the GPS directed me toward a turnoff I had missed 100 times before, a narrow gravel track almost hidden by overhanging rhododendrons. "Turn right," the GPS voice intoned. It wasn't the smooth, synthesized female voice I was used to. It was jagged, digital, skipping on the vowels like a scratched CD. "Turn right." I obeyed. I turned the wheel, the tires crunching loudly as we left the pavement. The transition was jarring. The smooth hum of asphalt was replaced by the violent clatter of loose stones pinging against the undercarriage. The trees here were different, older, gnarled, their branches interlocking above the road to form a tunnel. It felt like driving down a throat. The temperature in the car dropped another 10 degrees. My breath was coming in thick, white clouds now, fogging the windshield. I reached to wipe it away, my hand shaking.
And that's when I felt it again. The weight. The back of my seat depressed. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the center of gravity, like a passenger settling in for the ride. Then it became undeniable. The foam of the seat back compressed against my spine. Someone, something, was leaning forward, pressing their chest against the back of my seat. I could feel the cold radiating through the upholstery. It wasn't just low temperature, it was a void of heat, a sucking sensation that drew the warmth right out of my vertebrae. "Please," I whispered, the word barely escaping my frozen lips. "What do you want?" No answer. Just the crunch of gravel and the whining of the engine, which seemed to be revving higher than necessary, straining as if pulling a heavy load. I kept my eyes glued to the road, refusing to look at the rearview mirror. I knew if I looked, I would see it again. The pale face, the hollow sockets, the thing that had no business existing in a world of physics and logic. But the mirror hung there in my peripheral vision, a rectangle of judgment, daring me to look. The road grew steeper, winding downward into a valley I didn't know existed. The fog thickened, swirling in the headlight beams like dancing spirits. The GPS screen flickered. 0.5 miles. The car began to speed up. I took my foot off the gas, hovering over the brake. "Slow down," I muttered. The car didn't slow down. The pedal felt dead under my foot, disconnected from the master cylinder. The speedometer pimed. 20, 30. On a gravel track barely wide enough for one car,
30 felt like suicide. "Stop!" I yelled, stomping on the brake with both feet. The pedal hit the floor with a hollow thud, but the calipers didn't bite. The car surged forward, tires spinning on the loose rocks, sliding around a blind curve. I screamed, wrenching the wheel to the left to avoid a massive oak tree that loomed out of the mist, the rear end fishtailed, swinging wide. For a terrifying second, I felt the sickening weight of the car tipping, the suspension groaning under the strain. Then, a force, a physical, invisible hand, seemed to grab the rear axle. The car slammed back down onto the track, correcting itself with unnatural precision. It wasn't me driving anymore. I was just the meat in the seat. "In 400 feet, you will arrive," the glitchy voice stuttered. "You will arrive." The trees suddenly broke. The tunnel opened up into a small.
The headlights washed over a rusted iron gate. It was chained shut, leaning drunkenly on crumbling stone pillars. Beyond the bars, rows of weathered headstones jutted from the earth like crooked teeth, overgrown with kudzu and ivy. Old Oak Cemetery. The car didn't crash into the gate. It slowed smoothly, gliding to a halt mere inches from the rusted metal. The silence returned, crashing down on the cabin instantly as the engine cut out again. The headlights remained on, twin spotlights illuminating the entrance to the graveyard. I sat there, hyperventilating, my heart feeling like it was going to burst through my chest. The GPS screen glowed with a finality that terrified me. "You have arrived." The text didn't disappear. It pulsed, red. I waited for the attack. I waited for the cold hands to wrap around my throat, for the face to appear in the glass, for the end. Instead, a sound came from the door beside me. Clack. The lock plunger on the driver's side door slid up. It was the only one. The other 3 doors remained locked tight. The invitation was clear. I looked at the handle. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I didn't want to go out there. The cemetery looked ancient, forgotten, a place where the soil had gone sour. But staying in the car felt like staying inside the stomach of the beast. The pressure behind my seat was immense now, a physical force pushing me forward. "Get out," the radio whispered. It wasn't a request. I pulled the handle. The door creaked open, the sound echoing loudly in the valley. I stepped out into the night. The air was freezing, smelling of wet leaves and decay. My legs felt like jelly as I stood on the gravel, holding onto the doorframe for support. I looked back into the car. The interior light hadn't come on. The cabin was a cave of shadows. I couldn't see the back seat clearly, just the dark contours of the upholstery. But as I watched, the rear window began to fog up again. Right next to the first handprint, the one that had been there for miles, a second print began to form. It pressed against the glass from the inside, long fingers splaying out slowly. Then, the face appeared again, just for a heartbeat, pressed against the glass between the 2 handprints. It wasn't looking at me this time. It was looking past me, toward the gate. The chain on the cemetery gate rattled. I spun around, my back to the car. The heavy iron chain, rusted solid,
began to slide. Link by link, it slithered off the bars, as if lubricated by oil, falling to the gravel with a heavy, dull clank. The gate groaned. Slowly inward, it swung open. The path was clear, and from the darkness of the graveyard, a faint rhythmic sound drifted toward me. Thunk, thump, thump. It sounded like a shovel hitting the earth. Someone was digging.
Chapter 5. The Hollow Earth. Thump. Scrape. Thud. The sound was wet and heavy, a rhythmic cadence that echoed off the surrounding trees like a heartbeat in a cavern. It was the distinct, unmistakable noise of steel biting into damp earth, lifting the weight and discarding it. I stood frozen on the gravel, my hand still hovering near the door handle of my sedan. The cold mountain air bit through my thin jacket, raising gooseflesh on my arms, but the chill radiating from the cemetery gate was something else entirely, a psychic frost that settled deep in the marrow of my bones. "Hello?" I called out. My voice was brittle, cracking in the damp air. The digging didn't stop. Thump, scrape, thud. I turned back to the car, desperate to retreat. The safety of the metal box, even with the haunted passenger, suddenly seemed preferable to the open, exposed darkness of the graveyard. I grabbed the door handle and yanked. Locked. "No, no, no," I muttered, pulling harder. I peered through the driver's side window. The interior was pitch black, save for the eerie green glow of the GPS screen, which still pulsed with that single damning command: "You have arrived." I pounded on the glass with the flat of my palm. "Let me back in, open the damn door." The car ignored me. Instead, the engine revved, a short, sharp bark of mechanical aggression. Simultaneously, the high beams flicked on. The twin cones of light cut through the swirling mist, illuminating the path through the open iron gate and deep into the cemetery. They weren't just lights, they were a directive. Go. I was trapped between a possessed machine and a graveyard at 2:30 in the morning. The digging continued, a siren song of soil and stone. I took a step away from the car, then another. The gravel crunched loudly under my sneakers, sounding like breaking bones in the silence between the shovel strikes. I walked toward the gate, drawn by a morbid, terrifying curiosity that overrode my survival instincts. As I crossed the threshold of the rusted gate, the atmosphere changed. The air grew still, the wind dying down, as if the cemetery were holding its breath. The headlights of my car cast long, stretching shadows from the tombstones, crooked slabs of slate and granite that looked like jagged teeth erupting from the ground. Some were toppled, swallowed by decades of ivy. Others stood stark and upright, their engravings eroded by time and rain. Thump, scrape, thud. The sound was louder now.
Coming from the center of the graveyard, near the crest of a small hill, dominated by a massive weeping willow. The tree's branches hung low, trailing on the ground like the hair of a mourning giant. I crept forward, staying within the safety of the light beams as long as I could. But the path curved, and the digging was coming from the shadows beyond the reach of the headlights. I had to step into the dark. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo. I pulled my phone out again, praying for a miracle, but the screen remained dead black. I was navigating by the faint, ambient gray of the moon, filtering through the heavy mist. I reached the base of the hill. The smell of fresh dirt was overpowering here, rich, loamy, and laced with the metallic tang of something ancient. I crested the rise and saw him. A silhouette stood waist-deep in a rectangular hole. He was backlit by the faint moonlight, a dark cutout against the gray fog. He was rhythmic, efficient. He would drive the spade in, leverage the dirt out, and toss it onto a growing pile of spoil beside the grave. He wasn't a ghost. He looked solid. He was wearing a tattered coat that hung loosely on a frame that seemed too thin, too angular. "Hey," I shouted, the word exploding out of me before I could stop it. "Who are you?" The digging stopped instantly. The figure froze. The shovel held midair, a dark flag of surrender. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing moved. The silence rushed back in, filling the void left by the shovel's noise. Then slowly, the figure turned. He didn't climb out.
He just rotated his torso with a jerky, unnatural motion, like a marionette being twisted by an unseen hand. I couldn't see his face clearly in the gloom, just the pale suggestion of features, but I saw his eyes. They caught the faint reflection of the distant car headlights, shining with a wet, animalistic glint. "You're late," the man rasped. His voice was like grinding stones, dry, dusty, and devoid of any warmth. It wasn't the whispering voice from the radio. It was something older. I took a step back, my heel catching on a root. "What?" "The passenger," the man said, gesturing with the shovel toward my car, which sat idling at the gate like a waiting predator. "He doesn't like to wait. He gets restless." I looked back at the car. The headlights were blindingly bright from this angle, two staring eyes watching us. "There's no one in the car," I stammered, though I knew it was a lie.
I'm alone. The man in the grave let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. It was a harsh, barking noise. Alone? On this road? No one is ever alone on Route 17, son. You just carry the weight until it's time to put it down. He drove the shovel into the dirt again, not to dig, but to lean on it. "Is that?" I pointed a trembling finger at the hole. "Is that for me?" The man tilted his head. "Depends. Are you the one driving, or are you the one being driven?" The question hung in the air, nonsensical yet terrifyingly poignant. Suddenly, the car horn honked. It was a long, blaring sustain that shattered the quiet of the night. I jumped, spinning around. The headlights flickered rapidly, strobing like a disco light in hell. The engine roared, revving high and loud, the sound echoing off the valley walls. "He's impatient," the gravedigger murmured. He sounded closer now. I whipped my head back around. The man had moved. He wasn't leaning on the shovel anymore. He had pulled himself up to the edge of the grave with impossible speed. He was crawling out, his movements spider-like, limbs splayed at odd angles. "He wants you to see," the man hissed. "See what?" I backed away, stumbling down the slope of the hill. "The dead," the man said, standing up to his full height. He was tall, impossibly tall, his coat hanging in tatters around his knees. He pointed a long, dirt-stained finger toward the car. "Go back. Look at what you carry." The car horn stopped. The headlights steadied. But then, the rear door of the sedan, the one on the driver's side, clicked. I heard it from 50 yards away, the distinct mechanical pop of the latch releasing. Slowly, agonizingly, the rear door swung open. The interior light flickered on. It was dim, yellow, and sickly. From where I stood, amidst the tombstones in the fog, I could see into the back seat. It wasn't empty. There was something sitting there. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was corporeal. A figure, slumped against the far door, head lolling forward. It was wearing clothes that looked disturbingly familiar. A blue flannel shirt, jeans. My blue flannel shirt, my jeans. I froze, my breath trapped in a throat that felt like it was closing up. I looked down in my own chest. I was wearing a gray hoodie. "Go on," the gravedigger whispered, his voice right beside my ear now, though I hadn't heard him move. I didn't want to move. I wanted to sink into the earth and disappear, but the pull was there again, that magnetic, supernatural command that bypassed my will. I began to walk back toward the car, toward the open door, toward the thing wearing my clothes. As I got closer, the figure in the back seat slowly lifted its head. The face was pale, waxy, and slack-jawed. The eyes were open, staring blindly at the ceiling liner. It was me. It was my face, my dead, staring face. And on the window beside it, condensation began to gather again, forming a new shape. Not a handprint this time. Letters. W-A-K-E-U-P.
Chapter 6. The Reflection in Meat. The air in the cemetery had turned stagnant, thick with the copper tang of old blood and the damp rot of wet leaves. I stood paralyzed by the open rear door of my sedan, my mind fracturing under the weight of what I was seeing. The interior light cast a jaundiced, flickering glow over the back seat. There, slumped against the beige upholstery, was a body. It was wearing my blue flannel shirt, the one with the fraying cuff on the left sleeve. It was wearing my jeans, the ones with the oil stain near the pocket. It was wearing my face. The figure's head lolled against the window glass, the mouth hanging open in a slack, silent scream. The skin was the color of curdled milk, waxy and artificial, stripped of all vitality. The eyes were wide open, staring fixedly at the ceiling liner, clouded with the milky film of death. I looked down at my own hands. They were trembling, pink with blood flow, alive. I slapped my own chest, feeling the frantic hummingbird hammer of my heart. "This isn't real," I croaked. The sound of my voice was swallowed instantly by the heavy mist. "I'm standing right here." "Are you?" The voice came from behind me, the gravedigger. I spun around, nearly tripping over my own feet. The tall, gaunt figure had moved closer. He wasn't walking. He seemed to simply occupy space closer to me every time I blinked. He stood just outside the halo of the headlights, his face a topographical map of shadows and grime. "What is this?" I screamed at him, pointing a shaking finger at the car. "What did you put in my car?" "I didn't put anything there, Mike," the gravedigger said. His voice was no longer rasping. It was strangely smooth now, clinical, almost bored. "You brought him with you. You've been hauling him up this mountain for miles. Heavy load for one man." I looked back at the corpse. The resemblance was absolute. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was me, stripped of the soul, left to cool on the synthetic fabric of a Honda backseat. "I'm not dead," I whispered, the denial tasting like ash in my mouth. "Not yet," the gravedigger agreed. He leaned on his shovel, the metal scraping against a hidden rock. "Don't stop the car." The radio's warning echoed in my memory, a looped recording of my own doom. I backed away from the open door, revulsion warring with a terrible magnetic pull.
I wanted to run into the woods, to lose myself in the darkness of the trees, but my legs felt heavy, as if the gravity around the car had increased tenfold. The corpse in the back seat shifted. It was a subtle movement, the settling of dead weight. But in the silence, the sound of fabric rubbing against fabric was deafening. The head of the doppelganger rolled slowly to the left. The clouded eyes were no longer staring at the ceiling. They were staring at me. A jolt of electricity surged through my spine. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the gravel, and fell hard onto the cold, wet ground. I scrambled backward on my hands and heels, kicking up dirt, trying to put distance between me and the thing in the car. "He's waking up," the gravedigger said softly. "Or maybe you are." On the rear window, the condensation began to weep. The letters WAKEP lost their structural integrity. The water gathered in heavy droplets at the bottom of the characters and began to run down the glass in long, dark streaks that looked disturbingly like black tears. Then, The car horn blared again.
I looked at the car. It was a cage, a coffin on wheels, but it had lights, it had heat, and it had the passenger. I walked toward the driver's side. I didn't want to. I was weeping, tears streaming down my face, freezing in the cold air. But my body was moving on autopilot, driven by a survival instinct that defied logic. I grabbed the handle. The metal was ice cold. I pulled the door open and slid into the seat. The moment my door closed, the locks engaged. Clack, 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 clack. I was sealed in. The engine was already running. The heater was blasting. But the air coming from the vents wasn't warm anymore. It was freezing, smelling of ozone and singed hair. I looked at the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. The corpse was gone. My blue flannel shirt, my jeans, the waxy face, vanished. The upholstery was smooth, save for a deep, heavy depression in the foam where a body had been sitting moments ago. But the window? The text "Wake Up" was still there, but it was fading, being replaced by new condensation. And then, the radio crackled to life. It wasn't the whispering voice this time. It was a rhythmic, beeping sound. Beep, beep, beep. It sounded like a heart monitor. "Where is he?" I whispered to the empty car. "Where did he go?" The GPS screen flickered. The map of the cemetery dissolved, replaced by the spinning gray static. Then, the route recalculated. Destination, home. Distance, unknown. Time, running out. The engine revved, the RPM needle dancing near the red line. The car lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel, turning away from the gate, away from the gravedigger, and back toward the throat of the mountain road. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. I was driving, but I knew the truth now. The passenger hadn't left. He had just moved. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, a numbness in my fingers that had nothing to do with the temperature. The weight in the back seat was gone, because the weight was now in the driver's seat. I was carrying the passenger inside me. "Don't stop," I whispered to myself, my voice sounding strange, distant. "Just don't stop." As the car tore up the gravel track, leaving the cemetery behind, the rearview mirror vibrated. In the glass, for just a second, I saw my own reflection. But my reflection didn't blink when I did. It just stared back, its eyes wide, watching me drive us both into the dark.
Chapter 7: The Unblinking Twin. The transition from the gravel track of the cemetery back to the paved surface of Route 17 was jarring. The tires hit the asphalt with a rhythmic thud, thud, a sound that echoed through the chassis like a heartbeat skipping the pit of my stomach. The car was moving faster now, the speedometer climbing past 50, 60, 65. I wasn't pressing the gas. My feet were numb blocks of ice on the floor mat, disconnected from my brain. My hands, however, were fused to the steering wheel, gripped so tight that my forearms burned with lactic acid. I was driving, but I wasn't in control. Inside the cabin, the temperature had plummeted to a meat locker chill. The vents blasted air that smelled sterile, not the musty odor of old AC, but the sharp, stinging scent of rubbing alcohol and latex. It made my eyes water.
blurring the twisting road ahead into a smear of gray and black. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythmic sound from the radio had evolved. It wasn't just a tone anymore. It was wet, organic, like a sonar ping moving through fluid. It synced perfectly with the throbbing in my temples. I tried to keep my eyes forward, focusing on the yellow double line that snaked through the darkness like a lifeline. But the pull of the rearview mirror was a physical force, a hook in my cheek, dragging my gaze upward. I looked. The back seat was empty. No corpse. No shadow. Just the beige upholstery and the dent where the body had been. But the mirror itself, that was wrong. In the rectangular glass, my own face stared back at me. At first it seemed normal, pale, terrified, eyes wide with exhaustion. But then I blinked. The reflection didn't. I gasped, swerving slightly. The car corrected itself with a violent jerk, the steering wheel fighting my grip. I looked again. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 3, trying to reset my fractured reality. 1, 2, 3. I opened them. The reflection was still staring. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, devoid of the moistures coated my own, and then slowly, the corners of its mouth began to twist upward. It wasn't a smile of comfort. It was a rictus of malice, a knowing smirk that bared teeth too white, too straight. "Stop looking at me," I whispered, my voice trembling. The reflection's lips moved. No. The sound didn't come from the mirror.
"You're tired, Mike," the voice said. "Why are you fighting it? The road is long. Just let go." "I'm driving home," I yelled, the hysteria rising in my throat. "I'm going home." "You are home," the reflection mocked. In the mirror, the figure took its hands off the steering wheel and folded them behind its head, relaxing. But in the physical world, my hands were still locked at 10 and 2. "This is the box you live in now," the voice continued. "Metal and glass. It keeps you safe. It keeps you preserved." I tried to tear my hands from the wheel. I pulled with everything I had, straining my biceps until they shook, but my fingers were paralyzed, clawed around the leather rim. I was a prisoner in my own body, a puppet strung up by nerve endings I no longer commanded. Suddenly, the headlights flickered. The world outside plunged into total darkness for a heartbeat, then flashed back into existence. But the road had changed. It wasn't Route 17 anymore. The trees were gone. The guardrails were gone. On either side of the asphalt, endless rows of tall, vertical shapes rushed by. At 60 miles an hour, they blurred into a gray wall, but I could make out the details. They were hospital curtains. Thousands of them, suspended from an invisible ceiling in the sky, fluttering in the wind of my passing. "What is this?" I screamed. "Where are we?" "Transit," the radio replied. "We are in transit. Vital signs are dropping. Oil pressure is low." The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. The check engine light flashed red. The oil light blinked. The battery light pulsed in time with the beeping. Beep, beep, At 60 miles an hour, they blurred into a gray wall, but I could make out the details. They were hospital curtains. Thousands of them suspended from an invisible ceiling in the sky, fluttering in the wind of my passing. "What is this?" I screamed. "Where are we?" "Transit,"
the radio replied. "We are in transit. Vital signs are dropping. Oil pressure is low." The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. The check engine light flashed red. The oil light blinked. The battery light pulsed in time with the beeping. Beep, beep, Suddenly, the headlights flickered. The world outside plunged into total darkness for a heartbeat, then flashed back into existence. But the road had changed. It wasn't Route 17 anymore. The trees were gone. The guardrails were gone. On either side of the asphalt, endless rows of tall, vertical shapes rushed by. At 60 miles an hour, they blurred into a gray wall, but I could make out the details. They were hospital curtains, thousands of them suspended from an invisible ceiling in the sky, fluttering in the wind of my passing. "What is this?" I screamed. "Where are we?" "Transit," the radio replied. "We are in transit. Vital signs are dropping. Oil pressure is low." The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. The check engine light flashed red. The oil light blinked. The battery light pulsed in time with the beeping. Beep, beep, beep. I would want to keep radio normal, but haven't let him have fear as it's a mockery.
The sound tearing raw from my throat as the smell of ozone exploded in the cabin. The car accelerated. 70, 80. "Again, charge to 200, the woman's voice commanded. "Stop it," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "You're hurting me." "We're losing him," the reflection said. In the mirror, the other Mike looked bored, checking an invisible watch on his wrist. "He wants to pull over. He wants to park in the dark." "I don't," I sobbed. "I want to get out." "Then drive," the reflection roared, its face suddenly pressing against the glass from the inside, mashing its nose and lips against the mirror surface. "Drive through it!" The windshield suddenly fogged over completely. I was driving blind at 80 miles an hour. I slammed on the brakes, or tried to. My foot hit the floor, but the pedal was mush. The car didn't slow. On the white fog of the windshield, a shadow appeared. It was massive, looming directly in front of the car. It looked like a truck, or a gate, or a tunnel mouth. I braced for impact, squeezing my eyes shut. Wham! The car hit something soft. The sound was wet, sickening. The fog on the windshield turned red. A thick, crimson slurry washed over the glass, swept away frantically by the wipers, which had activated on their own. Swish, thump, swish, thump, smearing the red into streaks. I opened my eyes, hyperventilating. The road was clear again. The hospital curtains were gone, replaced by the towering pines of the mountain. But the car felt different now, heavier. I looked at the rearview mirror. The reflection was gone. The mirror was angled down, showing only the back seat. The dent in the upholstery was deeper now, and in the center of the seat, resting where a passenger's hand would be, was a key. Not a car key, a small silver key, the kind used for a diary or a cabinet, or a music box. The radio static returned, soft and low, whispering beneath the sound of the engine. "You have to open it, Mike." "Open what?" I wept. "The trunk." A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning swept through me. I knew with a terrible, sinking certainty what was in the trunk. I had known it for miles. I had known it since the GPS died. I wasn't just driving away from something. I was transporting something. The GPS screen chimed. Destination updated. The Overlook, 0.3 miles. The car began to slow down. The steering wheel turned under my frozen hands,
guiding us towards a scenic overlook that jutted out over the valley, a place where teenagers went to drink and lovers went to park, a place with a sheer drop into the abyss. The central locking clicked. Clack. The driver's door unlocked. The car rolled to a stop at the edge of the overlook, the headlights beaming out into the empty black void of the valley. "Get out," the radio whispered. "Check the trunk."
Chapter 8: The Black Box. The silver key sat in the center of the back seat, gleaming with a dull, malevolent luster under the dome light. It was small, old-fashioned, the kind of key you'd use for a diary or a grandfather clock, not a modern vehicle. It rested in the depression of the upholstery, the deep dent that still hadn't sprung back, as if an invisible heavy weight were still pressing down. I stared at it from the driver's seat, my breath hitching in my chest. The car was idling at the very edge of the overlook. Beyond the hood ornament, there was nothing but a consuming void. The headlights cut into the darkness, illuminating swirling mist in the tops of pine trees that grew hundreds of feet below. One slip of the gear shift, one spasm of the engine, and the car would tumble into the abyss. "Check the trunk," the radio had whispered. I didn't want to move. The car felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. But the compulsion was there, a physical hook in my gut dragging me toward the inevitable. I reached back. My hand trembled as it crossed the threshold between the front and back seats. The air in the rear of the cabin was significantly colder, a localized pocket of freezing temperature. As my fingers brushed the upholstery, I felt a static charge zap my skin, stinging like a wasp. I snatched the key. It was freezing, painful to the touch, as if it had been stored in a freezer. I pulled my hand back, clutching the cold metal, and unlocked the driver's door. Thunk. The wind hit me the moment I stepped out. It was violent up here on the ridge, a howling gale that tore at my clothes and stung my eyes. The silence of the car was replaced by the roar of nature, the wind in the trees, the distant rumble of thunder. I slammed the door shut, terrified that the interior light would reveal the passenger again. I walked to the rear of the car. The taillights cast a blood-red glow on the asphalt, bathing my hands in crimson. The exhaust pipe sputtered, coughing out thick gray smoke that smelled of burning plastic and something sweet, like rot. I stood before the trunk. The Honda emblem was cracked, a jagged fissure running through the chrome H. I looked at the keyhole. It was rusted, corroded as if the car had been sitting in a swamp for decades. I inserted the silver key. It didn't fit. It was too small. "It doesn't fit," I screamed at the wind, half hoping the car would answer. Click. The trunk popped open on its own. The lid rose slowly.
Agonizingly, the hinges screeching like a dying animal. The sound echoed off the cliff face, loud enough to wake the dead. I stepped forward, peering into the cavity. The trunk light flickered on. It wasn't the warm yellow of a standard bulb. It was a harsh, fluorescent blue, the same sterile light from the hospital hallucination. The trunk was empty of luggage. There was no spare tire, no jack. Instead, the floor of the trunk had been ripped away. The carpet was shredded, the metal beneath clawed open as if by desperate hands trying to dig out. And in the center of that jagged metal wound, there was a glass pane. It was a window. I leaned over, gripping the edges of the trunk, staring down into the glass. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. I wasn't looking at the spare tire well. I wasn't looking at the asphalt beneath the car. I was looking down from a great height. Through the glass in the trunk, I saw a ravine. It was dark, lit only by the sputtering flames of a small fire. Twisted metal was scattered across the rocks. A car, my car, was wrapped around the trunk of a massive oak tree, crumpled like a tin can.
Smoke curled up from the engine block. The windshield was shattered. And inside the wreckage, slumped over the steering wheel, was a man. He was wearing a blue flannel shirt. "No," I whispered, the wind snatching the word from my lips. "That's not. I'm here. I'm standing right here." I leaned closer, my nose almost touching the glass floor of the trunk. The figure in the wreckage moved. The man in the crushed car lifted his head. His face was a mask of blood. One eye was swollen shut. The other was wild, rolling in panic. He looked up. He looked up at me. He saw me staring down at him through the impossible window in the trunk of the car I was currently driving. His lips moved. He was screaming, but the glass muffled the sound. I could read the lips perfectly, though. "Help me." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't the driver. I wasn't the passenger. I was the ghost. I was the echo of the man dying in the ravine, wandering the road in a phantom shell, trying to process the trauma of his own death. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, tears blurring my vision. Suddenly, the engine roared. It wasn't a normal rev. It was a scream of mechanical rage. The car lurched backward. I was standing directly behind it. The bumper got me at the knees. I grumbled,
slamming onto the asphalt. The pain was sharp and real, too real for a ghost. The car didn't stop. The reverse lights blinded me. The tires shrieked as they found traction. It was trying to push me. I scrambled backward on my elbows, kicking out with my legs, scraping my skin raw on the pavement. The car was heavy, relentless, a 2-ton predator growling with intent. Behind me was the drop, the cliff edge. "Stop," I screamed. The trunk lid slammed shut with a bone-rattling bang, severing the connection to the dying man below. The car lunged at me again, backing up with terrifying speed. I rolled to the side just as the rear tire skidded over the spot where my head had been a second ago. The bumper clipped my shoulder, spinning me around. I was lying on the very edge of the precipice. Gravel rained down into the darkness as my hand slipped on the loose stones. The car stopped. It sat there, panting, the exhaust pipe blowing smoke directly into my face. Then the passenger door opened. Click. It swung wide, inviting the abyss in. The radio crackled. The volume was deafening now, distorting the speakers. "Get in." It wasn't a whisper. It was a command from the depths of hell. Get in or go over. I looked at the drop. Infinite darkness. A quick end. I looked at the open door. The interior was warm. The dashboard lights were glowing. It was a cage, yes, but it was my cage. And in the driver's seat? I squinted through the smoke. The driver's seat was occupied. The pale figure, the one with the hollow eyes and the lipless mouth, was sitting behind the wheel now. His hands were on the gear shift. He turned his head slowly to look at me lying in the dirt. He smiled. "Your turn to ride in the back, Mike."
Chapter 9. The Cargo. The wind at the overlook was a living thing, a shrieking banshee that tore at my clothes and tried to shove me into the abyss. My heels scrabbled against the loose gravel, sending a cascade of stones clattering down into the black throat of the valley below. I was inches from the drop, a sheer 300-foot fall into the jagged pines and the wreckage I had seen through the trunk floor. In front of me, the Honda idled like a beast waiting for its meal. The passenger door stood open, a gaping mouth of warm yellow light in the freezing night. And in the driver's seat sat the usurper. It, didn't look like a monster anymore. He looked like me. He was wearing my gray hoodie, my jeans. His hands resting casually on the steering wheel were my hands. But the posture was wrong. It was too rigid, too perfect, like a mannequin arranged by a window dresser who had never seen a human relax. He turned his head slowly, the vertebrae cracking audibly, and looked at me with those wide, unblinking eyes. "Get in," the radio screamed, the volume knob spinning on its own to the maximum limit. "The seat is warm. The ride is long." I looked at the darkness behind me. It offered a clean, final end. One bush, a few seconds of freefall, and then silence. Then I looked at the car. It was a prison. It was a torture chamber. But it was matter. It was existence. And the terrifying, pathetic truth of human nature kicked in. I wasn't ready to stop existing, even if existing meant this. I crawled. I dragged myself over the asphalt, my knees scraping raw, weeping with shame and terror. I moved toward the open back door, the exhaust fumes choking me, filling my lungs with the taste of burnt oil and sulfur. The entity in the driver's seat watched me in the rearview mirror. I could see his eyes in the glass, predatory, amused. I reached up, grabbed the gold medal of the doorframe, and pulled myself into the back seat. Wham! The door slammed shut the instant my trailing foot cleared the threshold. It didn't just close, it sealed. The air pressure in the cabin spiked, popping my ears. The lock plunger slid down with a final damning thud. I was inside. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the new car smell or the scent of air freshener. It was the smell of old, stagnant air, the kind you find in a house that has been boarded up for 50 years. It smelled of dust, dry rot, and something metallic, like copper coins held in a sweaty palm.
I scrambled to sit up, pressing my back against the upholstery. I was sitting in the dent, the deep depression in the phone that I had seen earlier. It fit my body perfectly. It held me like a mold. "Let me out," I whispered. My voice sounded wrong. It was thin, distant, as if I were speaking through a thick pane of glass. The driver didn't turn around. He shifted the car into drive. The gear shift moved with a wet, slick sound. "Buckle up," the driver said. His voice wasn't coming from the radio now. It was coming from his throat, my throat. It was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of empathy. The car lurched forward. We didn't turn around. We didn't back up. The driver simply drove straight off the edge of the overlook. I screamed, bracing for the fall, squeezing my eyes shut. But the fall never came. The car didn't drop. It hit an invisible surface, a phantom road suspended in the air, and accelerated. We were driving on nothing, hurtling through the fog at 80 miles an hour, banking sharply back toward the mountain road. I opened my eyes. We were back on Route 17, heading down the mountain. The transition had been seamless, impossible. The speed was terrifying. The trees outside were a blur of black ink. The driver wasn't using the brakes. He took the hairpin turns by jerking the wheel violently, the tires screaming in agony, the suspension groaning under the G-force. I was thrown side to side, slamming against the door panels, but the dent in the seat kept pulling me back to the center. "Slow down," I tried to yell, but only a dry rasp came out. The driver laughed. It was a soft, dry chuckle. He adjusted the rearview mirror with one hand, tilting it so his eyes met mine directly. "Why?" he asked. "You were in such a hurry before. You wanted to get home, remember?" "I don't know you," I wept. "You know me," the driver said. "I'm the part of you that kept driving. I'm the part that didn't want to stop when the tree came out of the fog. I'm the momentum." He floored the gas pedal. The engine roared, a high-pitched whine that sounded like a scream. The speedometer needle buried itself past 120. We were approaching the curve, the big one, the one with the old oak tree.
"No," I whispered. "Please." My hands felt cold. I looked down at them. They were fading. The skin was turning translucent, the veins beneath darkening to black. I rubbed them together, but I couldn't feel the friction. I was losing sensation. I was becoming.
"Look at the window, Mike," the driver commanded. I looked to my left. The rear window was fogging up again. I felt a sudden, overpowering urge to touch the glass. My hand moved without my permission. It floated up, pale and waxy, and pressed against the cold surface. My palm flattened against the condensation, my fingers splayed out. I watched, horrified, as I created the handprint. It was the same print I had seen hours ago, the same trailing smear of despair. I was the ghost. I had always been the ghost. The man driving the car in the beginning, that wasn't me. That was the echo of what I used to be. And the thing in the back seat, that was the reality of what I had become. "We have to warn him," I mumbled, my thoughts fracturing. "The driver, the other Mike, we have to tell him to stop." "He won't stop," the driver said, his eyes glued to the road, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "He never stops. That's why we're here. The loop, Mike, the snake eating its own tail." The radio crackled to life again. "Don't stop the car." It was my voice from the back seat, trying to save the man in the front. "I tried to save him," I yelled, my voice gaining a sudden spectral strength. "I told him not to stop." "You told him to keep going," the driver corrected. "You told him not to stop because you were afraid of the dark. You were afraid of the crash, so you made him drive forever." The car began to vibrate violently. The headlights flickered, strobing against the asphalt. Ahead, through the windshield, I saw taillights. Red, glowing, stationary. It was another car, a Honda sedan, stopped in the middle of the road. My heart stopped. It was my car, the version of my car from Chapter 1, the one where the GPS had just failed. I saw the silhouette of the driver inside. He was looking at his phone. He was confused. He was alive. "Ramming speed," the entity in the front seat whispered. "No," I shrieked. I threw myself forward, reaching over the console, trying to grab the wheel, trying to strangle the doppelganger, trying to do anything to change the outcome. My hands passed right through his shoulders. I was smoke. I was memory. The driver didn't even flinch. He aimed the car directly at the rear bumper of the idling sedan. "Watch closely," the driver said. "This is the best part." We weren't going to crash into the car. We were going to merge with it.
The headlights of our car washed over the rear window of the stationary Honda. And in that rear window, illuminated by our lights, I saw a face looking back. It was me, the terrified, living Mike from the beginning of the night. He was looking in his rearview mirror, his eyes widening as he saw the silhouette in his back seat. He wasn't seeing a monster. He was seeing me. I was the face in the mirror. I was the passenger. And as we slammed into the back of his reality, the world fractured into a billion shards of glass and light.
Chapter 10. The Residual. The collision was silent. There was no screech of tearing metal, no shattering of safety glass. When the car I was riding in, driven by the grinning, hollow thing wearing my face, slammed into the rear of the car driven by my past self, the world didn't end in fire, it ended in ice. A shockwave of absolute zero blasted through me. The universe folded in on itself like a piece of origami. The trees, the mountain road, the hospital curtains, the cemetery, everything compressed into a singular, blinding point of white light. I wasn't a body anymore. I was a sensation. I was the cold draft on the back of a neck. I was the heaviness in the air that makes a heart skip a beat. I felt myself being poured. It was a sickening, viscous sensation, like being squeezed through a funnel. I was being shoved into the back seat of the Honda ahead of us.
I wasn't sitting on the upholstery. I was being pressed into it. My essence, my memories, my terror, all of it was being injected into the foam and fabric of the rear bench. I tried to scream, to warn the Mike in the driver's seat, the Mike who was still alive, still driving, still clutching the wheel with white knuckles. "Don't stop," I tried to say, but I had no mouth. My voice was just a frequency now, a vibration in the car's wiring. It came out of the speakers as a desperate, static-fueled whisper. "Don't stop the car." The living Mike, the real me, flinched. I saw his eyes dart to the rearview mirror. He looked right at me. But he didn't see a man. He saw a shadow. He saw a trick of the light. I realized then, with a crushing finality, what I had become. I wasn't a ghost haunting a stranger. I was the trauma. I was the near-death experience manifesting in real time. I was the echo of the crash that had happened in the ravine, rippling back to save the man who hadn't crashed yet. The rest of the drive was a blur of disjointed horrors. I was a passenger in my own life, watching from the back seat as I tortured myself to stay awake. When the engine died, it was because I drained the battery trying to manifest. When the door handle pulled, it was me trying to escape the crushing gravity of the seat. When the face appeared in the mirror, it was me trying to scream, "Look at the road!" We drove through the night, a binary system of fear and survival. The living Mike was terrified, but he was driving. He was alive, and as long as he kept moving, the ravine couldn't claim him. Eventually,
The darkness began to thin. The oppressive black of the Appalachian pines turned to a bruised purple, then a slate gray. The fog lifted, retreating into the hollows of the valley. The GPS signal returned with a cheerful ping. The static on the radio resolved into a morning talk show, the banal chatter of the living world cutting through the nightmare. We were off the mountain. We were on the quiet suburban street where I lived. The living Mike pulled into the driveway. The engine cut out, for real this time. The silence that filled the cabin wasn't heavy or threatening. It was just quiet. I felt my consciousness fading. The sunlight creeping over the horizon was like acid to my form. I was losing my grip on the physical world. The energy that held me together was dissipating, sinking down into the inanimate objects around me. Living Mike sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just breathing. He rubbed his face, his hands shaking. "Just a nightmare," he whispered. "Jesus, Mike, just a nightmare." He opened the door and stepped out into the cool morning air. He didn't look back. He walked to the front door of the house, fumbled with his keys, and went inside. I remained. I was no longer a spirit. I was no longer a voice. I was just weight. I was just pressure. I sank deeper into the seat, anchoring myself to the one place where I existed. The sun rose fully. The birds began to sing. The world of the living resumed its ticking clock. Hours passed. The neighborhood woke up. Around 10 a.m., the front door of the house opened. Living Mike stepped out. He looked ragged, pale. Dark circles bruised under his eyes. He held a mug of coffee, the steam rising in the crisp air. He walked down the driveway, approaching the car slowly, warily, as if it were a sleeping animal that might bite. He circled the vehicle. He checked the tires. He ran a hand over the trunk lid, the lid that had revealed the ravine last night. It was solid metal now. No window. No wreckage. He let out a shaky breath, a laugh bubbling up in his chest. "You're losing it, man," he muttered. "Total psychosis. Sleep deprivation.
He reached for the rear door handle on the driver's side. He hesitated, his fingers hovering inches from the chrome. The memory of the lock clicking down by itself was still fresh. He pulled. The door opened with a normal, mechanical creak. He leaned in, ready to grab the gym bag he'd left on the floorboard. He froze. The mug slipped from his fingers.
It hit the driveway with a ceramic crack, splashing hot coffee over his sneakers. He didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the rear window. The condensation from the night had evaporated in the morning sun, but the oils from a human hand remained. A perfect, ghostly handprint was smeared on the inside of the glass. The fingers were long, dragging downward, trapped. It was his handprint, but he hadn't sat in the back. Slowly, terrified, his gaze lowered to the seat itself. The beige upholstery was pristine, except for one spot. On the rear bench, directly behind the driver, the foam was crushed. It was a deep, distinct depression, molded perfectly to the shape of a human body. It looked heavy. It looked occupied. It looked like someone had sat there all night, riding the terror down the mountain, and had never gotten out. Mike reached out a trembling hand. He pressed his palm against the dent. It was ice cold, and deep within the fabric, beneath the foam and the springs, he felt a faint, rhythmic vibration. Not a mechanical hum, not an engine. It was a heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. He snatched his hand back, stumbling away from the car, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet suburb. He backed away, eyes wide, retreating toward the safety of his house. But I stayed. I am the cold spot in the leather. I am the shadow in the glass. I am the passenger who pays the toll. And tonight, when the sun goes down and the keys turn in the ignition, we drive again.